So the way that I'd like to start this off is just by introducing you to HTML, especially because many of you have not seen HTML before. So I'm providing you with these example links to documentation to help you just get a sense of what's going on with HTML. So we could focus on some of this. With any HTML web page, there will be a certain structure to it. The page will probably start with a certain document declaration, and then we will have some kind of HTML tags. So in HTML, we're dealing with these tags that kind of look like carrots, and some of them have like a corresponding start and end tag. So what you'll see here is, like, for example, the opening of this tag called the head. And then there's something nested inside it, this title tag. And then here's where we see the closing of this head section. So with HTML, we see that tags have like carrots, and most of them have an opening and then a corresponding close. And anything within the opening and close is like a child element of that specific tag or element. So with an HTML page, we have two main sections of it that will always be present within the HTML tag itself, between the opening and closing HTML tags for a website. We'll see that each HTML page has a head section and a body section. And so here we see the opening and closing of the head section and the opening and closing of the body section. So in web pages, the head section provides some metadata about the page, but we don't see that on the page. We don't see anything about page title here on the right. This page title would be, this title attribute in the head section would be something we see in the browser. Like when we pause our mouse over the tab in the browser, we see some kind of title, and that's actually coming from the title tag in the head of this document. So the head section of a web page contains some metadata about the page, maybe some tags for Google Analytics or web searches. But it's the body tag that actually has all the good stuff that we care about and that we actually see on the page. So what we see here is that on the right, here's how we would see this HTML page in the browser. I guess this is a heading. That's coming from this H1 tag. An H1 tag is like a heading. And just like in a document structure in like Google Docs, we have heading levels 1 through 6. Instead of manually choosing which heading level a given text is in our document, with HTML, we programmatically specify this information to create a document structure. So here we have an H1 tag, and it's like a heading. And we have a P tag, which is like a paragraph. And then we see that any text in between the opening and closing of these tags is what we actually see on the page. So I just want to pause, see if there's any questions. So with HTML, we get to programmatically kind of compile some kind of HTML document. But what other elements are there? What elements might we see when we're making web pages and viewing other people's web pages? In the HTML basics link that I shared with you, we'll just see some other example elements. So we already took a look at these H1 element and a P element, like headings and paragraph text. There's different levels of headings. So we could use H1 for a top level heading, and then through H6. And then this has the most bearing on the structure of our page, but it also has some bearing on the size of these headings. And hopefully that matches your understanding about how like Google Docs works. When you create a top level heading, it's bigger. and like a third level heading that's smaller. But we use these headings generally to designate the structure of the page. So when you're looking at HTML, you might see heading tags H1 through H6. Okay, cool. And then again, we know that any text inside the opening and closing tag is what we actually see on the page. So what other elements will we expect to find? P tags are paragraph elements, and we took a look at those. Any text inside the opening and closing P tag will show up on the page, just some normal text. In HTML, when you click on a hyperlink, there's actually some programmatic A tag. There's an A tag element or a link element. And with some of these HTML elements, it's not just about the text in between the opening and closing tag. We do see here, this text says this is a link, and we do see that text here on the page. But with HTML, we also get to programmatically specify other attributes of certain elements. Not all elements have certain attributes, but elements like an A tag, which is a hyperlink, do have attributes. And the most important attribute for an A tag or like a link element is its href attribute, which just means, hey, this is the URL to send someone to when they click the link. So you could see how we can create hyperlinks in HTML using A tags. And if we do, we need an href attribute. And these attributes go in the beginning tag. So just a heads up about that. Other elements that we'll see could be images. So anyway, I'm sharing with you these documentation on this site called W3 Schools. And this is a great resource for you if you're interested in learning more about HTML. Right now, I'm just giving you like a high level sense of like, well, what is this about? So that when we try to programmatically parse the contents of some page and they're in HTML, we have some context about how to do that. So I guess with an image tag, there isn't a corresponding close. It's just the open IMG tag, and all of these attributes are inside of the opening tag, I guess. Like, where is the image file from? How big should it be? Stuff like that. I guess here with the IMG tag for displaying an image. All right, so those are some popular HTML elements, but the ones that we're going to focus on today, in terms of like being good sources of data, are lists and tables. So here, let's focus on lists for a minute. On the left, we see the HTML representation of the underlying page contents, and on the right, we see the web page display. So here we're looking at two different kinds of lists. One is looks like a bullet list here, the first one, and the other is like a numbered list. And so I just love a volunteer. What do you observe about the HTML structure on the left that corresponds with these lists that we see on the right? How are they similar to each other? How are they different? What are we expecting when we look at a list in HTML? Yes. Yeah. So depending on how we want the bullets to look, whether it's just bullets or numbers, we choose what kind of list to create. And that's designated here with either a UL tag, unordered list, bullet list, or an OL tag, ordered list, like numbered list. And so here you see, depending on which type of list we want to use, we have an opening and closing tag, either for unordered, like bulleted list, and then opening and closing tag here for our numbered list or ordered list. Other than that, though, the actual list items are designated with these nested LI tags. So if there's a list and it has data that we want to process, what we could do is find that list and then maybe like just conceptually like loop through all of its list items and try to like get the text of each. And so we will do that in a sec. We'll work with lists. All right, and those could be like sources of data that we would want to get, like, hey, let's get all of the items in this list. Maybe there's a data set there that we want. But besides lists, the other types of elements that we'll be focusing on today, is a table. So in the link that I provided you about tables, we'll see the corresponding HTML for the table. All right, and so there's a lot going on here. Could I have a volunteer to just try to help us figure out what the structure of the table element is and how it corresponds to what we would see in an actual table? What are some observations that we could make about this HTML for the table? Yeah, so I mean, when we look at the table representation, we see that the table contains, I guess, a header row and also any number of rows. And just like our CSV data, each cell will correspond with like its column header. So yeah, I guess the table is really just comprised of a number of rows. Okay, cool. Other thoughts about the HTML here? When we're dealing with tables, what we'll see is that they start and end with a table tag, and that defines everything that is this table. Now, we see that there is a TR element, a table row. And there actually are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 TR elements. And that's how we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows in this table. There's 7 TR table row elements. It turns out weirdly that the first table row has the column names and so might be treated differently. And we see that reflected by these TH nested elements inside the first table row. TH is like table heading, I guess. Instead of what we see for these other rows is TD for table data. But whether we have a TH or a TD, it's like some kind of cell inside of this row. And now any text that we see inside the TH or TD will actually be the cell contents. All right. So we have never seen, or many of us, most of us have never seen HTML before. We've never seen HTML lists or tables, but we have been working with programmatic data in Python, and we can kind of start to see some patterns in some data, and maybe we'll just observe the pattern and learn from that pattern, and maybe that will help us make a plan about how to parse the data. So if we were going to parse this data, I'd probably say, okay, find the table via this table element, and then find all of its rows and loop through them. And let's collect information about each one. And maybe we'll skip the first one or something like that. All right. So that's some high level information about HTML.